A few months ago, I made a video that would forever alter the trajectory of my channel, which may sound a bit dramatic or hyperbolic, but it makes sense when you realize this video has like 5 times the amount of engagement that any other video I've ever created has. And while I'm incredibly proud and stand by about 99 to 100% of what I said, I got a lot of variations of this comment: don't fix what isn't broken. Look what happened to Fortnite. Annoying fans popular bad game. OG proceeds to claim OG Diamond. Catching Pokemon shouldn't be quick and simple. No, they were incredibly poorly made. So much that Platinum had to make a ton of cherry picking, nitpicking, unfair comparisons, and parroting shotgunning balls at Pokemon. Yep, you're a doomer. Touch grass loser. I'd like Pokemon Arceus. I'd like to play my Pokemon. You are just so used to eating diarrhea. Great video. One issue though. I am in Gen 5 games. I can't even read this. He's probably calling me some mean names. You make some interesting points, but the overall amount of hate is overwhelming. And I kind of felt like some of these may have misinterpreted my vision of the series. And to be abundantly clear, I am not blaming any of these people at all. When you click on a video, especially in my case, you are getting about 30 minutes of perspective from someone you don't know on a series that not only spans several decades, but also one that I have consumed since I found out what a video game was. This series, while unsatisfactory at times, has also brought me an unimaginable amount of joy and comfort for a good majority of my life. So to clear everything up, today I am going to definitively rank every mainline Pokemon game, with a few exceptions. To start, I'm going to rank games primarily based on generation. So when ranking games like Diamond and Pearl, I will also be including Platinum in that category. I know they are technically different games, but this is already going to be a long video, and I have work tomorrow. I know the series and its fan base tend to be incredibly divisive, so before we begin, I want everyone to know that not only is this simply my opinion after consuming every game on the list, but that I'm also not trying to provoke anyone or be duplicitous with any of my placements on this list. This is a genuine expression of my feelings about every single one of these games. And now, without further ado, let's fucking do this.
Wait. Hold up. You've never played Gen 5, have you?
Okay, so, yeah, I've never actually played these games. Now, hold on, before you get your pitchforks, I've got good reasons. It's not that these are bad games. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Playing these on original hardware, and especially back in 2010, these games would surely be cheese in a can. But I don't exactly have a great reason why I didn't. Did something else come out at that time? Oh, fuck yeah, Halo Black and White. This game is like fucking... I don't know what a 3DS is. All I know is Xbox. But currently, I don't have a ton of time or patience to complete these games, especially on an emulator, so to give the games the respect they deserve, considering most of you on Twitter said that this was peak Pokemon, I wanted to hand this section off to a huge fan of Gen 5. So everyone give it up for Egon. Woo, Egon, yay!
Thank you, Kyler360. I am a massive Generation 5 fan. Black 2 was my introduction to the Pokemon games, and while that may make me a bit biased in terms of ranking, I think Game Freak implemented so many notable improvements in this generation that makes it a little difficult to go back and play older games. Black and White arguably took the biggest risks of any generation, isolating itself from any other games by having a completely unique regional dex, 156 all new Pokemon. You don't have access to any prior gens here, and while a lot of these new Pokemon are similar in nature to previous Mons, Machamp and Conkeldurr, Parasect and Crustle, these new Pokemon have all new typings, movesets, and abilities that make them a welcome shift from what people were used to up until this point. That isn't to say that the region is devoid of any originality. The Musharna line and their interactions with dreams led to the creation of the Pokemon Dream Radar app, as well as other mons like Ferrothorn, Seismitoad, and Heatmor are all new ideas that are valuable in a playthrough. The removal of old Pokemon makes you think just a little bit more about team creation, since you can't rely on series staples like Gyarados or Snorlax, leading to a lot of experimentation. This really helps make battles more exciting. And with the addition of dynamic moving sprites and music that changes as the battle goes on, it's no wonder that the online competitive scene really took off with this generation. Black and White were the first mainline games in the series to be based on a region outside of Japan, drawing heavy inspiration from the upstate region of New York. Being based off of such a diverse and populous area led to things such as characters that fit into American stereotypes, like Clay, cities with varying aesthetics to match the individuality all up and down the East Coast. This aspect of uniqueness helps make every location notable in the game, each holding some significance that prevents it from blending into the rest of the cities. Since this was the second generation to be featured on the Nintendo DS, Game Freak practically mastered how to develop for the console, showcasing their expertise with a beautiful and vibrant display of colors, most evident through the changing of the seasons, which is actually one of my favorite aspects of this generation. As you come back to play the games over time, the seasons will change, completely altering the aesthetic and even layout of certain routes. Game Freak saw this and created an entire Pokemon to take advantage of it. The Deerling line has their physical appearance and typing change depending on the season in which you caught it, making it one of my personal favorite Pokemon. The quality of these sprites and environments also has a notable improvement over Generation 4. The pseudo 3D style really pops here, with buildings having more depth to them, and cities like Castelia feeling like they're massive despite only having access to a handful of roads. Many fans like to point to these games as the pinnacle of Pokemon storytelling, these games holding the most introspective of the classic Pokemon dichotomy, the argument of truth versus ideals. Ideals tend to show up more throughout the course of the story. Most people imagine a world where people and Pokemon can coexist happily, although the region's evil team, Team Plasma, argues that people and Pokemon need to remain separate, since there are just too many instances of people taking advantage of their partners, when in reality, Team Plasma are actually the group abusing Pokemon, using what little stories of Pokemon abuse that there are to try and represent all human Pokemon interactions, with the main antagonist, N, serving as a medium for the player to contemplate with these clashing ideologies. But like the theme song for this generation's anime adaptation says, N has the ability to speak to Pokemon, but was only able to interact with just a small sample of Pokemon who had negative experiences with humans, causing him to align with Team Plasma, who are secretly planning world domination with one of the region's legendary dragons. With the help of the player, N eventually realizes the error of his ways, speaking to your personal Pokemon and seeing the deep connection that you have with them, taking the opposing box legendary with him and going on a journey of growth and self-reflection. Although this may seem like the perfect way to end a generation, Game Freak did something that they've never done before or since, creating direct sequel games that continue the story of the previous ones. The thought to create a second game stemmed from mechanics that were left out of the original, leading to an entirely new game. Pokemon Black 2 and White 2 follow a new main character, but it has you interact with a bunch of characters from the original. Charon is now a gym leader, and Alder became a mentor for new trainers. Anne is now even more of a mysterious figure who helps test the bonds with your Pokemon even more than before. What makes these games different from the originals, other than the story, is that you now go through the Unova region in a completely different way, visiting towns and cities that held little significance in the original, all while finally having access to Pokemon from earlier generations. The mechanic that spawned these sequel games that I mentioned earlier is what Getsus is trying to use to attempt another region takeover. The legendary dragons of the region, Reshiram and Zekrom, are two parts of what used to be one complete dragon, and Getsus is using the third dragon, Kyurem, to freeze the region and take control of it, later splicing Kyurem with either Reshiram or Zekrom to create an even more powerful threat. This is the mechanic, splicing two Pokemon to blend their typing, designs, and move pools. I can totally understand why they limited this to only the region's box legendaries, but imagine a game where you could do this with any Pokemon you want. Someone should really try and make that. The Generation 5 games are just a joy to play. The stories are engaging, allowing older audiences to look deeper into the argument the games are making. The new Pokemon force you to step outside of your comfort zone and experiment, something that you'll have to do if you decide to try the Battle Subway, Pokemon World Tournament, or the White Forest and Black City, post-game areas that really challenge your team building ability. The games look and sound phenomenal, with vibrant colors and impressive visual depth for a handheld DS title with some of the best music in the series. I can certainly understand why I and many others proclaim this to be the peak of the Pokemon series. The games came out when the Pokemon formula began to receive scrutiny from gaming outlets, claiming that it was stale and that a 5th generation would harm the series more than help it. But I think all the risks that they took in changing up the status quo led to some of the most devoted fans of the generation, and the reason why so many people were fearful of a remake. So while Kyler might not put this at number 1, I certainly will. Also, the Forces of Nature are the coolest legendary trio, and Genesect is peak.
Charge attack. Bingo. Easy. Done.
Kyler.
Done. So
Kyler.
Easy. Honestly, first try.
Kyler!
First try. Oh, thank you, Egon. On to the rest of the list. Yeah, this shouldn't be a shock, especially if you watched my video on the series before, but it also shouldn't be a shock because these games fucking suck. I was undoubtedly frustrated at the time, even going as far as to call Game Freak criminals. But can you blame me? When playing the game to gather footage for this video, all of the anger came rushing over me again like a twisted form of PTSD. This is old news now, considering these are the lowest rated Pokemon games ever released, but these games are not even bad in the sense that the gameplay is unfun. The game is bad in the sense that it is very clearly unfinished and was still sold to us at full price. Something that I think people seem to miss in that video is that I genuinely wanted to like these games so very badly, but it's hard to like what is essentially a scam. These games were $60 and obviously are held together by Elmer's glue and duct tape. The games are ugly, the performance is lousy, the story is dry, there's no voice acting, stale, and the open world is merely a poorly made illusion. The fact that Cyberpunk 2077 was a bigger scandal than Scarlet and Violet is still insane to me. Again, most likely not much of a surprise. These games are also very poorly done. Where I can't give Scarlet and Violet any modicum of praise, I can at least give Sword and Shield a few thumbs up. I never mentioned this in my original video, but I really did enjoy some of the multiplayer aspects of these games. The raid dens, while slow as fuck, were pretty fun all things considered.
Me to say a girl? Is that what you wanted me to say? No.
The wild area was also decent, but still lacking in a lot of areas as well. But that's kind of where my praise for the games start and end. As far as the rest of the game goes, yeah, it's fucking bland. I'm already sounding like Gordon Ramsay, but these games kind of remind me of a cafeteria burger. Like, yeah, it gets the job done if you're starving to death, but I'm not fucking eating this thing unless it is jammed into my esophagus. The fixed routes, the lack of voice acting, the dull environments, the poor optimization, and yeah, I just praised the multiplayer a bit, but loading into it is a fucking chore. I never mentioned this in my original video, but your starters can't even participate in one of the main gimmicks of the game, Gigantamaxing. Okay, well, actually, they can. But you gotta give them $30 for that, you stupid c***. Again, another situation where Game Freak sells us a fully priced game with half-assed features. These games don't quite commit the same crimes as the previous two games, but petty larceny is still a crime nonetheless. These games at the very least run and don't look awful graphically. The main issue I have with BDSP specifically is the fact that they removed content from the original games and sold it for a price that was more expensive than what it was 15 years earlier. Again, let's not forget, this came out in the same year as It Takes Two, Psychonauts 2, Resident Evil Village, Metroid Dread, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, Tales of Arise, Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Bowser's Fury. Plus, the chibi models are bizarre and look incredibly jarring, which I understand is what the games used to look like back in the day, but you can't take a 2D game and put it in 3D with the same style. It just doesn't work. But if you're not a chronic nitpicker such as myself, you are simply looking to play Gen 4 games on the Switch, and this art style doesn't give you kidney stones, then these games are just barely okay. Honestly, if you're gonna play a Pokemon game that was released in 2021, just play Pokemon Snap. It is far and wide the better experience. This is probably the first game we've gotten to on this list that is at the very least mostly enjoyable. These games rank this low for a few reasons, mostly because this is probably the least definitive way to experience the Kanto region. These games relied very heavily on Pokemon Go mechanics, which was kind of a hit or miss for a lot of fans. Essentially, there are no wild battles. The way you catch Pokemon is just by throwing balls at them, similar to a Safari Zone in the classic games. This, for me, doesn't justify not only a $60 remake, but another $40 controller shaped like a Pokeball, which I can't really bitch about because I am simply my own worst enemy. Regardless, I don't think these are horrible games necessarily. I think they're just a weird one considering that they were clearly made to bait nostalgia and capitalize on the colossal success of Pokemon Go. For a lot of fans, this is where the series started to take a dip in quality, and looking back on it, I wish this is what we could go back to. X and Y had the misfortune of being the first games to make the jump to 3D graphics, and it revealed how underdeveloped Game Freak was at this style. Making this massive jump, coupled with having to remake 700 Pokemon with all new styles and animations, seems like a monumental task. But I also think this is the moment that Game Freak realized they could just start cutting corners in certain aspects and still sell quite a few units. This game was kind of just your below average Pokemon experience, which is a shame because I think the world of X and Y is pretty decent all things considered, even though it takes place in... Also, yes, I know now that this song is Romanian, but it's got that accordion shit going on, so I couldn't help myself. In my video, I did praise the quality of the Pokemon added, but I do understand that a lot of the Pokemon in this game weren't super quality. It's just simply hard to deny the popularity of Pokemon like Greninja, which has since become a very major mascot for the series moving forward. Also, as I said, I do think Mega Evolutions are super badass, but I just wish more Pokemon received that treatment. Even with the addition of the Fairy typing, the PSS, and Super Training, this game still always felt massively undercooked. The whole gimmick of the console was the 3D functionality that barely functioned here. When using this feature, you were treated to a plethora of frame drops and a general slowdown during battles. A lot of the caves and routes felt like nothing more than just glorified hallways. And also, a new trend with Pokemon game in the future, a story where they just refuse to respect the player's intelligence. To surmise my thoughts into a sentence, not an awful Pokemon game, but simply just a Pokemon game. It may come as a shock that games that were released when Pokemon was seemingly on top of shit ranked this low, but let me explain real quick. While technically an upgrade from its older brother, Gen 2 had a ton of issues that make it difficult to look back on positively. Back then, this game was good, but now without the rose-tinted glasses, these games are no more than just average. To start, Johto isn't the most exciting region in this iteration, and while I do appreciate the simplicity and almost rustic nature of Johto, it wasn't enough to stand up to the monster that was Kanto. A lot of the new Johto mons were kinda shoved into the post-game, very convoluted to acquire, or generally too weak, which made going through the base game kind of grindy, which makes sense for the games with some of the worst level scaling in any fucking Pokemon game then or since. Additionally, they added a handful of new Pokeballs that were coded improperly, so completely useless for anything other than aesthetic. Crystal does fix a handful of these issues, as should any enhanced port of a game, adding things like a day and night cycle, breeding and hatching eggs, and the addition of shiny Pokemon. I really do like the batch of starters here, and they're surely a top contender for my favorites in any game, which is obviously nostalgia bait because Cyndaquil was my first ever starter, therefore he is my favorite. I also think the inclusion of the Kanto postgame was not only neat, but revolutionary for the series at the time, and made this game worth a play. But if you're trying to play these games in 2024, the flaws will surely be at the forefront of your playthrough. It may be a bit confusing that Sun and Moon rank as highly as it does, considering that these games are just covered in controversy. Where most Pokemon games go north, this game goes forward, for better or for worse. I do appreciate the massive risk Game Freak took in these games, making it one of the more audacious stories they've told up to this point. While for the most part, I think the story could have been done well, they were way too fucking intrusive with it.
You're moving to Alola! Alola is a region made up of several islands. Or an Alola either.
Well,
you're Alola.
Are you pumped to meet some Alolan Pokemon? We're living in the Alola region now. I don't know.
You gotta be tired after that long trip all the way out here to Alola. You sure are a long way from Kanto out here in Alola. Welcome to Alola. Yeah, sure, the kahuna who lives in Iki Town. So let's get going to Iki Town. This is the Alola region, if you didn't know that by now. Folks here in Alola get along by living together with Pokemon and working together too, and always saying Alola. First, we're off to Iki Town. Have I mentioned Iki Town yet? I feel like I haven't mentioned.
Hey, we're in Alola, by the way.
It's not far if we cut up here to go to Iki Town in Alola, and we're here. This right here is that in Iki Town I told you about earlier once.
I feel like 20 of my 40 hours of this game were mashing through the massive amounts of cutscenes and dialogue, which is honestly the last thing I want in my monster collecting turn-based JRPG. The game kind of disrespects the player's intelligence with tutorial after tutorial. Like, it damn near feels like this game is afraid to give up control and just let you play the fucking game. Oh, and by the way, this is a top contender for the longest and most annoying fucking intro in any Pokemon game. In the old games, it's like, okay, maybe 30 minutes max to go get your mons and go do shit. This game takes like an hour and a half to even get to the fucking Pokemon, let alone allow you to use the goddamn thing. The new Z moves were kinda cool, but coming off of Mega Evolutions kinda set this gimmick up for big time failure. Plus, honestly, my feelings on these starters are mixed to mid, especially now that Incineroar made his way into Super Smash Bros, because quite honestly, I don't think anyone would have paid any attention to him otherwise. It's probably starting to sound like I hate this game, which I don't hate it. I just think this is the game with the most squabbled potential. I love the Hawaiian aesthetic of Alola and think the region, when operating at its best, is compelling and fun to traverse. The OST very naturally fits this aesthetic as well, with lots of guitars and smooth listening, which I find nice to listen to. Additionally, I do like a lot of the regional forms and thought that this was a really neat change to seeing a lot of the typical Pokemon I was starting to get sick of seeing at the time. I don't mind the change from the typical gym formula to the newly implemented island trials, but I think it surely could have been done better. I wanted to like these games more than I did so very fucking badly, but unfortunately the potential was lost with the lack of player-driven gameplay. Thankfully, now, this is kind of what I wanted from the start, to be completely honest with you. Now, why did I not include Ultra Sun and Moon in with Sun and Moon like I did with Gold, Silver, and Crystal? Well, while I felt like Crystal didn't make enough changes to talk about it divorced from its source material, I think that Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon fix a majority of the issues I have in Sun and Moon, but not enough to push it any higher up the list. The games are definitely more streamlined and provide a couple of quality of life updates, like a single confirmation for forgetting moves, but the saying still applies: polish a turd and it's still a turd. The anticipation surrounding these games was pretty surreal. The excitement fans shared for revisiting some classic Pokemon games was pretty loud. All in all, people were mostly mixed to disappointed on this one. While certainly you can't deny the wonderful experience that is Gen 3, which we will get to soon, this game did drop the Pokeball in a lot of areas. Rather than feeling like a true reimagining of Ruby and Sapphire, this game felt like simply a graphical upgrade. The Delta episode was decent, and as a Mega Evolution defender, I was fine with this, but those are pretty much the only substantial changes, other than the incessant handholding and oversimplification of the gameplay. The lack of a Battlefront Frontier and character customization really rubbed fans the wrong way, myself included, but mostly this game is disliked because it's not a whole lot better than just going back and playing Emerald. On the flip side though, I didn't hate these games all that much, just because Gen 3 is so fun in and of itself, that with these changes I wasn't super pissed, just kinda meh. This follows the Pokemon remake rule, which is if you're just looking to play Gen 3 on newer hardware and you don't care about all the nitpicky changes, this is probably gonna be fine for you. This is a situation where the games are way outdated, but you kinda gotta pay respects to the OGs. This game has the blessing of being the first in the series, but also has the misfortune of being first in the series. I mean, shit, these games came out in 1996. Do you expect this shit to look like fucking the Ghost of Tsushima? The impact of these titles can just not be understated. These games spawned an entire franchise that is somehow bigger than every other fucking franchise. These games spawned toys, card games, movies, anime, and countless offshoot games. The social aspect of the series is one that probably paved the way for it to be such a success, with its massive emphasis on battling and trading, helping connect players in meaningful ways. The gameplay loop that the titles introduced was not only a fun one, but one that was incredibly addicting for casual and hardcore fans. Between the 151 Pokemon and the very innovative world building at the time, these games were a technical achievement and pushed the boundaries of what handheld games could truly become. The Pokemon here offered nice, simple designs, stuff as simple as rats and birds, gave players something easy to relate to. But as I said, these games are old, and ones that have become functionally obsolete with newer entries and iterations. It's kinda like Yakuza 1. Like, nowadays, is it that good? Hell fucking no. But you gotta tip your cap, because these games started what is almost a revolution in video games. Good on you, Red and Blue. And Yellow. Remember when I said that Red, Blue, and Yellow are pretty much functionally obsolete due to newer entries and iterations about 45 seconds ago? This is what I'm talking about here. If you're looking to play the best possible iteration of the Kanto region, look no further than FireRed and LeafGreen. Bringing Kanto out of its glitchy and poorly coded games into a more modern version was exactly what the region needed. Once you play these, it's nearly fucking impossible to go back. The sprites are way cleaner, you get running shoes, updated movesets, updated graphics, the Versus Seeker, Sevi Island, and oh yeah, fucking color. Lots of other important gameplay changes were made here too, like the massively enhanced battle interface, updated battle mechanics, and the post-game. Plus, and I don't know if this is confirmed, this is just me speculating, but I feel like every single fucking Pokemon ROM hack uses the FireRed and LeafGreen base game. Like, so many of them use it, it is fucking ridiculous. After all of these enhancements and changes, there is no reason to go back to the previous versions of them. These set the bar for what a Pokemon remake should do, which sucks seeing what is getting passed off as a remake nowadays. These games easily stand the test of time, not only as remakes, but simply as general Pokemon titles. Okay, listen, hear me out. I can almost guarantee this is where people are gonna give me shit, but I encourage you to listen to my points here. Now, this game was released relatively recently, therefore I can understand how a recency bias would be a factor here, especially since this game tailed what was, at the time, the most negatively reviewed Pokemon game ever. But I think aside from all of that, Legends Arceus has the best gameplay of any fucking Pokemon game that has ever been released. The gameplay loop is especially satisfying, and is probably what I and many others imagined an open world, or rather pseudo-open world, Pokemon game would be. I love just about 95% of this game. The only thing holding the games back is the story, and average to below average graphics. And even then, I'm fine with the game having below average graphics as long as I'm having fun with the base game. But I will agree that this story is unfucking forgivable. Putting that to the side though, I loved the shit out of this game. This is what I echoed in my other Pokemon video, expressing that this game alone gives me some hope for the series going forward. Almost to the point where I'm willing to buy another Pokemon game so long as it'll be as good as this. What did this game add that makes it so good though? Well, okay, to start, there is no greater feeling than catching a Pokemon in the overworld. It just never gets old. I love how quick and visceral it feels to just throw a Pokeball at something and then in 1 second have it in your party or in your box. Battles are super quick because they know that this isn't why we're playing the game. EXP is super easy to come by simply by catching Pokemon or gathering materials used to make balls and other items, lessening the grindy aspect of typical Pokemon games. You know, I love this game because they took a super stale and moldy formula and hit it with some fucking Febreze. This was one of the first Pokemon games in a very long time where you almost couldn't physically remove me from my controller because it was so goddamn fun. Now let's just pray to Arceus himself that Legend Za will be just as good, if not better. When doing my typical research for this video, I asked my personal Discord server what their favorite Pokemon games were, and the winner was Gen 4, and it's honestly not hard to see why. These games are something special. Typically, the Pokemon cycle includes shitting on the old games and defending the new ones, because the fans need to justify spending their $60 on mid. But the joke's on you, fucko, I spent $40 on this. And for my $40, I got some fucking awesome Pokemon designs, like the starters, which are fan favorites for many. Plus Pokemon like Luxray, Garchomp, and even Bidoof all became beloved Pokemon. I quite loved Sinnoh as a region and the overtly dense history it provided. And while talking about Sinnoh, the alternate dimensions of the Distortion world introduced in Platinum felt quite ambitious for a Pokemon game. The narrative here was also a lot more fleshed out than in previous entries. Team Galactic had more complex motives than the other teams in the other Pokemon games at the time. The mythos that the Pokemon Arceus added helped to enrich the game's narrative depths as well. We also can't deny the fucking raw energy of Cynthia, who is still one of the coolest champions we've ever gotten, especially because of this awesome fucking song that still haunts me to this day. There was also the introduction of the physical special split, which was a fucking event back in the day. Before these games, moves were classified into physical and special moves based on their typings. So, for example, the move Bite was considered a special move because it was a dark type move. But this doesn't make any fucking sense because biting someone, I would argue, is pretty fucking physical. In this generation, they changed this so that moves like Bite and otherwise would be fixed. This changed battle strategy so that players would better utilize their Pokemon's strengths and weaknesses. Furthermore, the hardware these games were released on really furthered the evolution of the series, adding Wi-Fi functionality and enhancing the social aspect of Pokemon. I know a lot of people are quick to call these games slow, but I think that every Pokemon game is slow. At least this one is fun. I think people when my age talk about the time of peak Pokemon games, they're not only thinking of Gen 4, but more importantly, Gen 3. I absolutely love the Hoenn region. These are probably my second favorite batch of starters, and I think that everyone will probably agree with me on that front. Plus, out of all the Pokemon games, the Hoenn region has some of the most memorable towns. I love the diversity between them and how special and well-crafted each of them feels. Speaking of Hoenn, one of the biggest complaints about the region is the amount of water-based routes there are, spawning one of the most prolific Pokemon memes from the IGN review of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, too much water. But this argument to me is fucking ridiculous. The entire story hinges on the balance between land and sea. Like, maybe it's not appropriate from a gameplay perspective, but thematically this makes a lot of sense. Going off of this, I don't think that Team Magma and Team Aqua are as goofy as other people seem to think. I actually kind of like how they're not over-the-top evil like some of the other games, and how they genuinely each think they are doing the morally correct thing. The growth of these antagonists was an interesting change for the series. As far as gameplay, Gen 3 made a lot of gameplay changes that made it as good as it is. Double battles were super innovative for the series and are still big for the game and the competitive community especially. I also really appreciated the introduction of abilities and natures, which added a great layer of complexity to battling. The new hardware gives us sprite animations, battle effects, and better sound design, which made the games more immersive than previous entries. Secret bases were so fucking cool. Like, decorating my base and showing it off to my friends just continued to add to Pokemon's social aspects. Additionally, these games had a great post-game with a battle frontier, which is why so many fans were disappointed with Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire for removing it. Like, these games were revolutionary for the series, and ushered in a large number of new fans for the series, myself included. These were the games I started to really get into Pokemon with, and for that I am super grateful. When I started writing this video, I tried to keep the blurb for each game a bit shorter just so this video wasn't too long, but I'm about to Voltorb self-destruct on you guys with just how much this game changed my fucking life. Like, holy shit, where do I even begin with this game? With the general disappointment of Gen 2, Game Freak had a ton of room to correct themselves, and I think they did exactly that in these games. These games aren't merely updates to Gen 2, these are complete comprehensive reimaginings of Gold and Silver. These games elegantly balance nostalgia with innovation, setting a very high standard for remakes in the future. The Pokewalker was a really fun addition to the game, kind of setting the precedence for Pokemon Go over a decade earlier. This was a device you could send your Pokemon into and level it up by just walking. Also, there were studies done on the Pokewalker establishing it as one of the most accurate pedometers ever made. Fucking leave it to Nintendo to make one of the most accurate pedometers ever for a fucking Gen 2 remake. Tragically, I lost mine just because as a kid, I moved houses over 10 times and I must have misplaced it along the way. So if anyone finds a Pokewalker with a pseudo-wudo in it, DM me and I'll give you my address and $20. Anyway, let's get into the games themselves. Bringing the Pokemon following feature back from Pokemon Yellow was a feature I wished for in every Pokemon game. I don't know why this feature is so compelling to me, but I love it so much. It's really hard to become attached to a virtual animal, especially one that looks like this. But when they follow me around, I just get so attached to them. It just helps to bolster the Pokemon trainer relationship. Being on the newer hardware, the graphics, design, and sound is better than ever. Plus, we get all the new Wi-Fi features that make battling and trading easier with the addition of the GTS. This game also got the physical special split treatment we talked about earlier, which was a huge plus for everyone. The game introduced gym leader rematches, which allowed you to rematch gym leaders with enhanced teams and levels. We also got the berry pot that made berries easier to harvest, so you don't have to backtrack to where you planted them originally. I also loved how the characters in the game were expanded upon. The rival in this game starts out as a giant fucking asshole, but later on he goes through a metamorphosis that isn't only told through the story, but through fucking gameplay. What do I mean? When you battle Silver throughout the game, he has a Golbat, but once he goes through his change of heart, his Golbat evolves into a Crobat. That is such an insignificant detail, but shows the lengths Game Freak was willing to go through to make the perfect game. The Pokeathlon is another great part of this game, giving us another game within the game. This helped to further the relationship between you and your Pokemon. This was handled pretty similarly to the contests or the super contests. You could play a variety of different mini games based on your Pokemon's performance stats like speed, power, skill, or stamina. These weren't just fun mini games though. You could earn points to spend on prizes like healing items, apricorns, or evolutionary stones. The post game is fucking brilliant and lets you explore Kanto as it does in the originals, but lets you see those badges when you get there, making progress easier to track. I really do love Johto too. I love how quiet and almost quaint it is. It has a really large focus on nature, which just makes sense on why I love games like this and Red Dead 2. Johto not only is my favorite region, but it's enhanced with this beautiful soundtrack. The game opens up with one of the most exciting tracks in the game that gets you just pumped to get into the action. The Ice Cave music is curious and has a deep bass and some light bell-sounding arpeggios to contrast, giving it almost a mystical feel. The gym leader's music is intense and makes the battle feel like the most important moment of your life. Azalea Town is a carefree and happy tune that feels a lot like some easy listening you'd hear on the radio. And by far, my favorite song in any Pokemon game ever made, National Park. This song is so beautiful. This song still brings me to my fucking knees and blows my back out with its pure beauty. I don't know how anyone can listen to this without sobbing uncontrollably. These games not only changed my view on Pokemon, but really did forge my love for video games in general. Playing this game for the video just brought me back to my childhood. Is this nostalgia talking? Probably. But I love these games. Fuck it, I'll say it. They really put their heart and soul into these games. And I love all of you for watching this video. I know this list was probably missing a ton of stuff, but there's lots of games and only one Kyler, and Egon. As I said earlier, this is a super subjective list. I know that whatever game you grew up on is probably your favorite, but rather than fighting, I would love to hear your favorite Pokemon games in the comments. Thank you for watching, gamers.